death of Saddam Hussein, the overthrow of Mubarak. They tie each of these events to specific prophecies in their holy texts. And they also view the tension between the U.S. and Israel as the fulfillment of prophecy. That's what we're playing into. Wow. An Iranian newspaper tied to Khomeini boasted that the U.S. had rejected Israel in recent months. And he says, and this is a quote, "It can be said that within the last 60 years, this is the first time that the Zionist regime, since its illegal inception, has had to endure rejection by the West over its vision and interest in the region." And so they're not looking at this just as a positive development for their strategy. They're viewing it as the fulfillment of prophecy, Israel becoming isolated so that they can destroy it. Now, one of the biggest questions I get is, why haven't they done it yet? If they're so crazy, why haven't they done it yet? And there's a few reasons. First of all, they're waiting to gain more power, such as having nuclear weapons capability. Because they're not like Al-Qaeda. They don't just use whatever's at their disposal. The Iranian regime operates in a similar way to the Muslim Brotherhood. They recognize their weaknesses, and so they want to do this with as little cost as possible. And they believe that when that conflict finally happens, the Mahdi is going to come and rescue them and defeat their enemy. But according to Ahmadinejad's movie, there are two signs to be fulfilled. The first is the creation of an Arab coalition that's anti-Israel. And they say that the Muslim Brotherhood's takeover of Egypt and rising in other countries is in accordance with their prophecy. So all the events you're hearing about the Muslim Brotherhood, according to them, is fulfilling their prophecy and paving the way for the destruction of Israel. And the other sign, and this one really scares me, is the death of Saudi King Abdullah. He's very old. We don't know his age because the Saudi press lies about it a lot. But he's very old, in very poor health. And the film makes it very clear that that is the green light for all this to begin. He doesn't have long, and I'm going to be very scared once he passes away. And then after that, they believe that they have to retake Jerusalem, and then that is what makes the Mahdi appear. So we don't have a whole lot of time. And that's why everyone has to be engaged, and that's why I hope you sign our newsletter, get involved in this fight, and I'll open it up for questions with that.
You said there were heroes on the left and on the right, Democrats and Republicans. How do we as laymen, as the average schmo, know who they are or know to recognize them?
That's a good question. There's no central base for that. Website where you can go to and says these are the Muslim Brotherhood's enemies, but you can tell by their press releases. So Senator Chuck Schumer, for example, out of New York, CARE has gone after him quite a bit. There's lots of Democratic congressmen that they've gone after. Basically, if they disagree with you on anything, particularly the issue of Israel, they go after you on. And if they like you, they give you awards. So it's actually relatively easy to find these things out. What I would do is if you're looking at a specific politician, type in his name and then type in something like Council on American Islamic Relations, just a name of one of these organizations, and see what pops up. Because these guys are fighters. If they don't like this politician, they'll go after him, and that means that they've won your vote. If they like you, then they're going to just heap praise upon you, and you're going to be able to find it out.
Is the government aware of how, they control the Islamic centers in the country, or they just don't care? I mean,
There's a few different problems here. There are some that do know it, but they surrender to it because they can't prosecute them for it. The Muslim Brotherhood's not designated as a terrorist organization. So you can't just arrest them for being a Muslim Brotherhood operative. So they say, look, until they actually are planning to do something violent, we're going to focus our attention elsewhere. A lot of them don't know it, and then a lot of them have heard about it, but then their mind has been infected with this propaganda that's coming all from the Islamophobes. And so they hear it, and then they hear groups like CARE, or they hear their friends in government saying, just dismiss that. That's just the anti-Muslim blogs going after them, and it gets dismissed. And now, as I was telling you about with the training guidelines, we have a serious problem on our hands because no one in the future is going to be taught about this at all. They're being taught that there's no Muslim Brotherhood presence in the United States to begin with. I mean, how do you fight against that? It's very, very tough. Gain traction. Glenn Beck is doing an excellent job now. He's really playing a leadership role in this. His new company is called The Blaze, and they do documentaries on this stuff that are just absolutely incredible. Some elements of talk radio are doing well. Mark Levin, for example, took my article on Christie and just blasted it everywhere. So that's where we're gaining the most traction.
I was reminded of how Hitler won so many millions of people to lead them into the furnaces. He did it by deception. He did it by twisting the truth. He led them to think that they were going to work camps when he was actually leading them. So we as Americans need to be more astute about the subtlety and the hidden agenda by what you're saying. It's amazing to me. We're duped.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're definitely duped, and yeah, I mean, the strategy is very similar to the Nazis. There may be some difference in ideology, but when you look at the use of deception, that's something that Americans are not accustomed to. When we lie, we feel bad, even if it's a white lie. There's part of us that gets nervous as we do it. If you're a jihadist, it doesn't even enter your mind. You're just following God's commandment. So it's a completely different mindset.
I have a question about the mosques, like the one in New York that was like down by the 9/11,
Okay.
by the trade centers.
Okay, right.
And then, I don't know if you know about the two in this area, Booton and Rockaway.
Oh, that's right.
They're not ringing any bells. It doesn't mean I didn't look into them. It's possible I looked into them and I didn't find anything to worry about. But it's definitely something I'm going to be looking into soon as part of this project, because naturally I have a lot of interest in finding out what goes on in New Jersey. So just there'll be more information coming on that. If you want, you can get my card afterwards. Send me an email and I'll look into it. It's actually relatively quickly for me to do. Amazingly, if you look at a lot of these mosques' bylaws, you'll see in there that they're owned by a group called the North American Islamic Trust, and that's a Muslim Brotherhood front. So, so a lot of the time, the information that you're looking for is going to come out of their own mouths or their own websites.
Can you give us a little behind the scenes on this recent demonstration and killing in Syria, and how is our response as a country encouraging or discouraging what's happening?
I really should have talked about that. Our response is guaranteed that's going to happen again. And the reason for that is because we're misjudging what caused all of it. Aside from the Al-Qaeda attack in Libya that killed our ambassador, which had nothing to do with that anti-Muhammad movie on YouTube, there are riots across the Islamic world right now because of this horribly made video that nobody watched, nobody paid attention to on YouTube, until a radical Islamic cleric broadcasted it on his station to whip people up. And our response was not to target the ideology behind this. It was essentially to apologize for the First Amendment while saying we're sorry for offending you, but we disagree with your methods, and that doesn't cut it. You see, the problem isn't that they're offended. The degree to which they're being offended it has been created by the Islamist ideology. People don't normally get so offended over a movie mocking their religion that nobody watched that they kill people. That's not normal. Right. You have to be taught that. And so the core problem here is the Islamist ideology. So you have to go beyond attacking, oh, well, we understand why you're offended, but we don't like you acting in violence, to saying, no, even the fact that you're this offended is a problem. Right. It doesn't mean you can't be offended at all. I don't like it when people mock my religion, but I don't get so mad that I'm going to take a day out to go riot or attack people. That's the ideology at play. And so we have to recognize that. And when President Obama was speaking at the UN, he did point out some of the double standards, how they're not rioting when Christians get killed, which was very good of him to do. But then he had to put in this one line that drove me crazy, where he said, the future must not belong to those that slander the Prophet of Islam. Now, it's fine for him to distance himself from the mockery of a major religion. I understand that. But what he did there was he reinforced the Islamist narrative that there's a war on Islam and Muslims are being systematically persecuted and they have to be very fearful. He confirmed that. When you say the world must not belong to anti-Islamic people, you're making it sound like that's a real threat, that it's possible that the world can be taken over by these anti-Islamic forces. If I was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, I would take that and put it on loop on one of my TV stations. It's really incredible. And then just the other point you mentioned, Syria. For example, think about how these groups focus so much on what's going on in Israel. And they focus on this anti-Muhammad movie while 30,000 people have been massacred in Syria. I mean, it's just huge. And then the other point I would have, because I've thought about this a lot, is President Clinton actually had the best comments about this anti-Muhammad video. And I wish they had gotten more play. And I'm surprised that it didn't cause more riots. He said, this is the product of a shame-based society. And he said, and this is how they should react. I couldn't believe Clinton said this. He goes, they should believe that their God is strong enough to withstand criticism from a video on YouTube.
Yes.
I mean, that was good language. That was tough language. Virtually no one heard about. But I was very happy to hear it.
I just have one question myself. I'm going to be selfish. But it ties into this weekend. What was great is our first speaker, we pretty much had a first-hand person who was involved in the revolution and was there, and we got to see this. And in turn, he talked about Islamberg, which I know you know where I'm going with this.
I got kicked out of there.
Could you just tell us about what you experienced? I know the video eventually is going to come out, and you're working with Clarion on it. I don't want to give away spoilers or anything, but you go into a little bit of a detail, because that's a very close example of radical Islam that's mobilized, has created its own society, and it seems like a blight that just someone doesn't want to deal with. And kind of just explain that a little bit, and then we'll close from there.
Sure. Islamberg is a place that exists in New York. It's 70 acres large. It's basically a society unto itself. It's run by a group called Muslims of the Americas that's led by a cleric in Pakistan that says Jews are examples of human Satans. So it's very radical. They don't hide it very well. And I was working for and by the way, they say they have 22 of these places around the country. They call them villages. And like I said before, Islamberg I have visited, so I know it exists. I was escorted semi-politely out of it. I was working for another organization when we really brought their name through the mud using facts, and they realized that they had to undergo a makeover. And so they set up a new front, same people, just different name. And it's called the United Muslim Christian Forum. You go to their website, you see the mayor of Binghamton, New York holding their sign. I went to one of their events where they had pastors and priests endorsing them, all in the names of intolerance. This stuff works. When these Islamist groups set up these interfaith efforts, you wouldn't believe how many churches go along with it. It's crazy. And I went there, and it's a 99% black Muslim group, so they knew that I didn't belong there. And so I went in there, and I just went through and listened to all of their preaching and stuff, and I went up to one of the leaders of their camp in Red House, Virginia, and I had a hidden camera on me, and I asked him, I said, you know, this is great work that you're doing. I just really appreciate it. I got some printouts from your website I just want to ask you about. Your leader says Jews are examples of human Satans. Yep, that's my sheikh. Okay. Your website says that the Jews are behind 9/11 as part of a plot to wage war on Muslims. Yeah, well, we're trying not to be into the bashing business anymore. That's exactly what he said. I said, all right, now what about the gunfire coming from your guys' compounds? And his answer was, what's wrong with shooting a gun if you're an American? All of this information can be easily found out, yet you have elected officials and priests and pastors and Christian missionaries that either just don't care to put their name into a Google search because they care that much about showing how tolerant they are. It's really amazing. And I got a hold of one of their own training tapes that showed their women at Islamberg getting guerrilla warfare training. I mean, in military fatigue, practicing sword fighting, shooting guns, scaling walls, and practicing how to cut throats. Now, here's another example of the effectiveness of just keeping your ears open. There had been some vague information about one of these camps being in the area of Sweeney, Texas. But no one knew really where it was. I couldn't find any information about it. And to make a long story short, I teamed up with some citizens that live in the area, talked to some of the neighbors, and it turns out the neighbors are like, yeah, it's over there. I located it on Google Earth, so my partners went there and visited the area. They started talking to the neighbors. Neighbors are like, yeah, there's always gunfire going on over there. I mean, that is what happens when an alert citizen should have just talked to the right person. You know, I mean, and so we came by that information just because an average citizen, I'm not expecting everyone to do this, went to the area and talked to the neighbors. Now, what if you were the neighbor to that neighbor? What if they told you, oh, there's gunfire going over there, and then you sent it to me or someone else, and then we could expose it? So that's a report that I'll probably be publishing hopefully within the next 2 or 3 weeks. I still have some additional research to do on it. But again, when that article comes out, you'll learn about it through radicalislam.org, our website.